Hey everyone, I'm Manero here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to paint with realistic looking gouache in Procreate. So let's jump right into it. In order to achieve this, I'm going to be using my recently launched Natural Gouache brush set for Procreate. You can find it along with a free mini version for you to try out on my Gumroad page through the link in the top right corner of this video or in the description below. Let's have a look at everything the full set includes. Natural Gouache is incredibly packed, with a large collection of 110 brushes conveniently organized in categories. It comes with a high-resolution paper texture that is specific to work with gouache, and 5 different consistency levels of gouache textures in PNG format that you can add to your canvases for an additional touch of realism. It also includes a few time lapses of paintings that I made using this set, like this couple here. But most importantly, the set comes with a 42-page guidebook in PDF format, where I slowly take you through all the brush categories, how to use the included PNG textures, how to set up your canvas and layers, and even a step-by-step tutorial that will teach you how to do this painting. This PDF is also included with the free sample, so I would highly recommend checking it out to give you a better understanding of everything that is possible to achieve with the full set. For today's demo, I'm going to be using this awesome photo referenced by Lex Melony. I will leave the link in the description below in case you'd like to follow along. Before I start painting, I like to decide which brushes out of the full set I'm going to use for this particular piece. There's plenty of options, so doing this helps with envisioning my workflow. In this particular case, I'm going to use the flat and clean brush to apply a digital masking tape around the edges of my painting. The Natural Gouache pencil will come in handy for sketching the subject. I'll use the Super Light Wash 3 for the first general washes. The medium wash brush will do a lot of heavy lifting throughout my painting, since it allows for a lot of versatility when it comes to doing lighter or thicker brush strokes, depending on pressure. The hard gouache square will help me add some extra rough texture as if I was using semi-dry paint, and it can also be used with the smudge tool for some blending. The spread brushes 1 to 3 will help me add variety to my brush strokes. The Clean Gouache Scatter 1 and 5 brushes will be great for adding thick paint marks in specific spots. And the Directional Scatter 6 and 7 will come in handy when adding additional texture to the rocks behind the flamingos. I recommend you to do a little swatching with these brushes yourself to get a feel for how they behave. The first thing we need to do is to create a new document. I'm going to be working on an 8.5 by 8.5 inches canvas at 300 dpi. The next step is to prepare the canvas with the textures included in this set. I'll put the files up side by side with Procreate, and I will drag and drop the files into my canvas. The first one is the paper texture. This layer needs to stay at the bottom of the layers menu. I recommend you to name your layers as you add them so that they're easier to identify. Then I'm going to import all of the 5 textures that you can find in the Texture Sheets folder. Notice that each one has a different number and name. This is the order in which we need to import them, starting with the one named T, and Butter being the last. Again, make sure to name each layer as you import them to make sure that you know which is which. These textures will help us achieve different levels of gouache consistencies, from more thin and watery to more thick and opaque. After I have all the layers in the correct order, I'm going to click on the little N next to the layer names and change the blending mode to overlay for all the layers except for the paper texture. Notice that I'm also turning each layer off as I go through them. I will bring them back later when they're needed. For now, I'll just keep them there. I'm now going to create a margin around the edges of the canvas, mimicking the use of masking tape in traditional media. To achieve this, I'm creating a new layer on top of all the other layers. And I'm using the flat and clean brush, drawing along the edges and holding the Apple Pencil at the end of each line to make them perfectly straight. If it happens to you that some of these lines have a little bit of transparency, you can duplicate the layer and merge them together. I then duplicate the paper texture layer and I place it above the masking tape layer. Tapping again on the layer will bring this pop-up menu with the layer options. I select Clipping Mask. This will make the duplicated paper texture to only show up in the areas where I painted the margins. What this does is that I can now paint on any layer below the masking tape layer, and I will always have these clean margins around the edges of the painting. Now I create a new layer above the original paper texture, and I'll name this one Rough Sketch. In this layer, I'm sketching the very basic shapes, focusing on the placement for the flamingos and the rocks behind. I don't care about details at this point. Here I realized that I forgot to do one step that I like to do before working on my sketch, so I'll fix that now. I turn off the sketch layer for a moment and I create a new layer below the T texture. I turn the T texture layer on. Click on the layer again to open the layer options and I turn it into a clipping mask. Again, this will make the T texture to affect only the areas where I paint in the layer right below it. I'm naming this layer Underpainting. Now, using the Super Light Wash 3 brush, I'm going to cover the whole canvas using a light blue color. I try not to lift my Apple Pencil while I do this, so that the strokes don't overlap too much with each other. I then drag and drop the rough sketch layer above the T texture. Procreate will automatically turn it into a clipping mask, so I make sure to turn that off. I then click on the little N in the layer to lower the opacity of the rough sketch. And I create a new layer on top. In this new layer, I'm going to work on my final sketch, a more refined sketch this time, using the rough sketch as a guide, but approaching it with more detail and precision. I even use lines to separate areas that will be in the light and areas that will be in the shadow, like you can see in the bodies of the flamingos or in the rocks behind. Now I add another layer on top of the sketch, and I'll name it Background. I turn the coffee texture on, click on the layer again, and choose the clipping mask option. This way the coffee texture will only affect the background layer. Using the Super Light Wash 3 brush, I can add some first washes to get a feel for the colors in the different areas. I can then switch to the medium wash brush to start painting with a bit more consistency. All I'm doing is to use my sketch as a reference for where to place my colors by observing the photo reference. Notice that I'm avoiding painting inside the flamingos, and I'm only focusing on the background. Adding the deep shadows in the rocks really helps to start defining hard edges that differentiate each rock from the others. Switching now between the 3 different spread brushes, I can start painting some loose brush strokes in the water and other areas in the rocks. This will give my painting a more organic look. I create a new layer between the coffee and the milk textures, and I'm going to name this one Background Details. I also turn the milk texture into a clipping mask by selecting it in the Layer Options menu. I then continue painting with the medium wash brush, adding more weight and opaqueness to the rocks. It's a good moment to use the hard gouache square brush to add some dry texture in different spots of the background. It is best to be thoughtful and measure the amount of this kind of texture we're adding. It is better to be subtle than going too far. I'm creating now a new layer between the milk and cream textures, and I'm turning the cream texture into a clipping mask. Every new layer that I'm creating with one of these textures clipped into them is with the idea that the gouache texture is going to feel more thick and opaque as I continue adding layers on top of the previous ones, just like we would do when painting with real gouache on paper. In this layer, I'm using the selection tool to isolate specific areas that I want to paint with precision using the Clean Gouache Scatter 1 and 5 brushes. These brushes are great to add super thick and realistic looking brush strokes. It's also a good time to use the directional scatter 6 and 7 brushes to add some pointillism to the bottom of the rocks near the water and a couple of other places based on what I observe in the reference. Now, because I left the flamingos untouched, I can go back to one of the lower layers, like the one affected by the coffee texture, to start painting the flamingos with a more watery gouache effect. I start by laying down a general wash using pink and the Super Light Wash 3 brush. I also start to use darker shades of pink in the shadow areas. I then go back to the layer affected by the cream texture, and since I forgot to name it earlier, I'll call this layer Subject. I switch to the medium wash brush again, and I'll start working with thicker and more opaque strokes while rendering the flamingos. While I'm trying to paint what I see in the photo reference, I'm not trying to copy it one-to-one. Instead, I'm allowing my brush strokes to be loose and a little messy, so that the final piece looks painterly and interesting. I'm also focusing only on one of the flamingos first. Once I feel like it's almost there, I can jump to the other flamingo, using the first one as a reference for what I did. I then repeat the process with the second flamingo. Here I consider what to do with the final sketch layer. I could get rid of it entirely, and in some cases you will want to do that, but in this particular case, I think that having the sketch layer present is contributing to the painting to look more defined. So instead of deleting it entirely, I click on the layer options and I activate alpha lock. This allows me to recolorize the lines of the sketch by painting over them. Painting the lines with colors that are closer to the ones in those areas in my painting makes the lines to be present but in a more subtle way. After doing this, I continue detailing the flamingos. I am pretty advanced with the painting, so it is a good time to create a new layer and activate the last gouache texture called butter. I turn it into a clipping mask. Turns out I forgot to name the new layer, but you could call it Final Details. The idea here is to basically finish up the rendering of the flamingos and add any extra details that I feel the painting needs. I'm playing with the sprayed brushes again to add some more detail to the water, painting more ripples, and adding smaller brush strokes in the rocks to add more texture and detail to them. I can also add some finer details to the feathers of the flamingos, and so on. At the end, I can experiment with the layer modes in the gouache textures. For example, in the thicker textures, like cream and butter, I could use hard light or linear light instead of overlay to get an even thicker effect. But it is always a good idea to play with the opacity slider to fine-tune how much of the texture is noticeable. If you don't want to mess up with this, leaving all the gouache textures in overlay mode will also work just fine. And this is the final result. I really hope you liked this video. If you use my brushes and post your art on social media, feel free to use the hashtag #ManeroBrushes and tag me so that I can see what you create. I will be extremely happy to share your creations with my audience. Don't forget to subscribe for more art-related videos and give me a thumbs up. Also, make sure to check out my Gumroad page, where you will find my Natural Gouache brush set for Procreate, and many other sets and freebies that I have available. I'm sure something will suit your artistic needs. All the links are in the description below. Okay, thank you for watching. See you next time.